Hello and welcome to my channel, Lifestyle and Fashion Tea. I thought I would talk about the first lady gangster. I have been hearing so much about Big Meech, Lil Durk, Big Durk, Lil Moo Moo, Big Moo Moo, Big U, Lil U, Big Ketchup, Lil Mustard. So I thought I'd talk about Stephanie Saint Clair. Let's get into her. And if you didn't know, Stephanie Saint Clair, she was the woman that Cicely Tyson portrayed in the movie Hoodlum, which is still one of my favorite movies. So Stephanie Saint Clair was born December 24th, She was a racketeer who ran numerous enterprises in Harlem, New York in the early 20th century. St. Clair resisted the mafia's interests for several years after Prohibition ended. She became a local legend for her public denunciations of corrupt police and resisting mafia control. She ran a successful numbers game in Harlem and was an activist for the black community. Her nicknames included Queenie, Madame Queen, Madame Saint Clair, and Queen of the Policy Rackets. Stephanie Saint Clair was born of African descent in the West Indies to a single mother who worked hard to send her daughter to school, according to Saint Clair's 1924 Declaration of Intention. She gave Fort-de-France, French West Indies, as her place of birth. When St. Clair turned 12, her mother became very ill and St. Clair had to leave school. She managed to have some money and after the death of her mother, left Martinique to Montreal, likely coming as part of the 1910 to 1911 Caribbean domestic scheme, which brought domestic workers to Quebec. She immigrated to the United States from Montreal, arriving in New York in 1912. She used the voyage and subsequent quarantine to learn English. In Harlem, she fell in love with the small-time crook, Duke, who soon tried to prostitute her but was shot in a fight between gangs. After 4 months, she decided to start her own business, selling controlled rugs with the help of her new boyfriend, Ed. After a few months, she had made $30,000 and told Ed she wanted to leave him and start her own business. Ed tried to strangle her, and she pushed him away with such force that he cracked his skull against a table and died. For months afterwards, she employed her own men, bribed policemen, and on April 12, 1917, invested $10,000 of her own money in a clandestine lottery game in Harlem. As a result of her success running one of the leading numbers game in the city, she became known throughout Manhattan as Queenie, but Harlem residents referred to her as Madame Saint Clair. St. Clair was involved in policy banking, which for her was a mixture of investing, gambling, and playing the lottery. Many banks at this time would not accept black customers, so they were not able to invest legally. Policy banking wasn't technically legal, but it was one of the few options offered to black Harlem residents who wished to invest their money. It was also a predominantly black industry, which allowed many bankers to have a sense of agency that would not be possible in white-dominated fields. In this way, St. Clair used the underground economy in Harlem to address race politics. At this time, the numbers game in Harlem was male-dominated, and St. Clair was one of the few women involved. She helped the black community in Harlem by providing many jobs, such as numbers runners. Part of the numbers bankers' activity was financing otherwise legitimate small businesses which took players' bets. She also helped her community by donating money to programs that promoted racial progress. Because of her success in the numbers game, she lived a lavish life, making over $20,000 per year in the 1920s. Saint Clair was known to put out ads in the local newspapers educating the Harlem community about their legal rights, advocating for voting rights, and calling out police brutality against the black community. Several times she complained to local authorities about harassment by the police. When they paid no heed, she ran advertisements in Harlem newspapers accusing senior police officers of corruption. The police responded by arresting her on a trumped up charge, and she spent 8 months in a workhouse. In response, she testified to the Seabury Commission about the kickbacks she had paid police officers and those who had participated in the Harlem numbers game. The commission subsequently fired more than a dozen police officers. At the end of Prohibition, Jewish and Italian American crime families saw a decrease in profits and decided to move in on the Harlem gambling scene. Bronx-based mob boss Dutch Schultz was the first to move in, beating and killing numbers operators who would not pay him protection. Saint Clair and her chief enforcer, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, refused to pay protection to Schultz, despite the violence and intimidation by police they faced. Saint Clair responded by attacking the storefronts of businesses that ran Dutch Schultz, beating operations and tipping off the police about him. This resulted in the police raiding his house, arresting more than a dozen of his employees, and seizing approximately 12 million, about 190.6 million today. St. Clair never submitted to Dutch Schultz, unlike many others in Harlem. After St. Clair's struggles with Schultz, she had to become legitimate and stay away from the police, so she passed on her criminal business to Bumpy Johnson, eventually her former enforcer. This was negotiated with Lucky Luciano, and Lucky took over Schultz spots with a percentage going to Bumpy. The mafiosa then had to go to Bumpy first if they had any problems in Harlem. Luciano realized the war in Harlem was bad for business. Schultz was fatally wounded in a shooting ordered by the commission in 1935. St. Clair, though uninvolved in the hit, sent an infamous telegram to Schultz on his deathbed that read, and I quote, "As ye sow, so shall ye reap." The telegram reportedly made headlines across the nation. By the 1940s, Johnson had become the reigning king in Harlem, and St. Clair became less and less involved in the numbers game. After St. Clair retired from the numbers game, she started a new era of her life as an advocate for political reform. In the late 1930s, she met her husband, Sufi Abdul Hamid, known as the Black Hitler, for his anti-Semitic Nazi fashion of activism. Hamid was a militant activist and was leader of an Islamic Buddhist cult. St. Clair and Hamid's marriage went downhill quickly when he allegedly had an affair with a black fortune teller known as Fu Futam. Hamid went on to marry Futam, whose real name was Dorothy Matthews. In April of 1938, they founded a Buddhist temple. The marriage officially ended in January 1938 when St. Clair shot Hamid during a fight over his relationship with Futam. She was sentenced to 2 to 10 years at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in New York. After she was released from prison in the early 1940s, St. Clair lived a secluded life and was reported as having successfully transitioned from underworld figure to a legitimate, prosperous businesswoman. She continued to write columns in the local newspaper about discrimination, police brutality, illegal search raids, and other issues facing the Black community. St. Clair died quietly and still wealthy in 1969, shortly before her 73rd birthday. Bumpy Johnson, who had come back to live with her and to write poetry, had died 1 year earlier. However, her death was never mentioned in the newspaper of the era. So the queen started off all wrong, but in the end, just like a woman, she learned how to get it right. Rest in peace, Stephanie St. Clair, mob boss of Harlem. Like, share, and subscribe.